be alone. Because it's more than proximity to people. Isolation is an emotion uniquely felt in that its meaning rests almost entirely on the perspective of the person experiencing it. This is what makes isolation an emotion profoundly nuanced in its film interpretation. How an audience chooses to see isolation contextually rests on the shoulders of the filmmaker creating it. And since, like all emotions, isolation is layered and complex, filmic attempts to capture it must rely on an abstract and personal understanding of the given experience. Art house is able to free itself from a lot of the more traditional and restrictive elements of filmmaking. It doesn't limit its reach or emotional range based on logic or established understanding of how the world, and by extension ourselves, should work. Because of this, many art house films are able to center their focus on refined emotions or themes through abstract imagery and ideas. In a phrase, they are uniquely adept at capturing feeling. Happy as Lazzaro, a soft-spoken social commentary on class and persistent innocence, and Melancholia, an exploration into the subtle experience of clinical depression, are two modern examples of art house films that approach a specific feeling in different ways. Happy as Lazzaro's director, Alice Rohrwacher, uses specific conventions of art house in her work to subvert traditional feelings of isolation and juxtapose them through her main character, Lazzaro, a young Italian peasant boy whose naivete, genuine trust, and hope carry both his own story and the stories of those around him. Melancholia, in contrast, chronicles the experiences of Justine, a young woman who is both literally and metaphorically facing the end of the world, as the film follows her and her sister Claire's emotional journey and personal relationship. Its director, Lars von Trier, uses various stylistic techniques to imbue viewers with a sense that they, in the grand scheme of things, are truly and entirely alone. Both use the established techniques and traits of their genre to amplify their chosen focus, and for these two films, their focus is isolation. But what makes the isolation in these films unique experiences and unique examples of art house? To answer that, we need to analyze both films' understanding and interpretation of space, color, feeling, and time, and their niche understanding of being alone. So, let's take a look at Happy as Lazzaro and Melancholia. Melancholia's editing provokes a sense of lost time very similar to the experience of dissociation, a common symptom of depressive episodes. Irregular cuts or jumps forward in typically linear experiences through editing disconnect both the main character and the audience from the physical setting of the film and the other characters placed within it. This is also aided by jumps and skips in the diegetic sound of the film. This understanding of the linear nature of time relative to human perception and the ability to subvert it is well implemented through actual practical techniques. The looser narrative structure and lack of attention to common sense is often used in art house films to accentuate the more emotionally provocative aspects of their work. Style and form often take precedence over logic in order to develop the specific theme or emotional reaction the director wants to gain from their audience. Meanwhile, Happy as Lazzaro also manipulates time, but in a more structural and plot-driven way. Its narrative leans towards the concept of magical realism, manipulating chronology in different ways for different characters without any established rules or explanations, another prevalent theme in art house filmmaking. This manipulation of time is especially powerful in isolating the main character from the world around him. He often exists literally outside of his own time. This temporal shift is also placed very deliberately halfway through the film, so the audience feels the same disconnect as the main character. They grow accustomed to his world and the people within it, so when there is an abrupt change, the disconnect is felt profoundly. There's a distinct sense of running behind in Happy as Lazzaro, whereas in Melancholia, we find that time is running out. These changes across both films are also aided by their implementation of color theory. Both Melancholia and Happy as Lazzaro use a dramatic change in palette to signify both thematic and chronological turning points in their films. Melancholia uses mise-en-scène and heavy color correction to create a distinct visual difference between its first and second act. Its approach to isolation lies a lot in its palette and understanding of contrast. The first half of the film is saturated with yellow, highlighted in cream, and shadowed in deep browns and muddy yellow-greens. These deeply saturated warm colors create a specific kind of juxtapositional isolation. We identify with our main character Justine, surrounded by crowds of happy people dancing and laughing in a warm setting, a setting which makes her disconnect from her surroundings hit that much harder. The reliance on shadows and lack of lighting in many of these shots also creates a muted, oppressive aura, placing heavy emphasis on how trapped and suppressed Justine seems to be, even when surrounded by what is supposed to be love. Happy as Lazzaro employs a similar technique in that it color blocks its two main acts. However, there is less of an obvious reliance on color correction in post. Being shot on traditional film as opposed to digital video lends Happy as Lazzaro a distinct visual style that is amplified by the color choices of the film. In Happy as Lazzaro, we can see a vibrancy to the shots that Melancholia seems to lack. This actually makes sense, though, if you consider the primary messages of the two films. Melancholia is almost like walking through a fog, pushing through deprivation and loss and cultivating a desperate reliance on numbness. It leans more towards muted colors and monochromatic palettes in an attempt to mirror the subdued and drained feeling of clinical depression. So, in Melancholia, a lack of bright color means a lack of feeling. In this way, both films paint their surroundings as a reflection of their characters, but Happy as Lazzaro, by contrast, relies on hope. That's why we see vibrancy. Lazzaro is disconnected from his surroundings and the people within them, but not unhappily. His innocence is his strength, but also what prevents him from truly connecting with the people around him. Lazzaro's world is bright and green and blue. It, much like him, reflects and tunes itself into the people around it. When the people change, colors change. And as Lazzaro gradually finds himself more and more alone, the colors reflect it. Physical geography is used very differently between Melancholia and Happy as Lazzaro, which is in part influenced by the social and cultural implications of each film. Melancholia uses different locations sparingly, focusing on the social, and despite having quite a significant time period elapsed over the course of the film, it remains set and filmed in one place. Characters may leave or attempt to leave, but the audience is never shown a secondary setting. Everyone always finds their way back to exactly the same place. This cyclical and visually limited futility is intentional and reflects the unique sense of isolation that the film focuses on. Happy as Lazzaro's use of setting is tied in a lot more with its cultural context. Utilizing the mountains and fields of rural Italy in contrast with open urban spaces creates a pointed commentary on the realities of class struggle and wealth-related power dynamics. Geography in this film also lends to the idea of isolation, particularly in the countryside. Key shots in the film draw their compositional techniques from the expansiveness of the outside world. Wide, static shots with impersonal perspectives place their characters in a world that looks almost uninhabited. And similar techniques employed in the urban setting allow the audience to remove their focus from the presence of new people and carry over that same feeling of disconnect to a more crowded setting. Art house catalyzes emotion. Its reliance on meaning gives it a unique avenue to express feeling through pure style. Logic falls behind, and reasoning is thrown to the wind, in a way mirroring us too. When we feel deeply, and oftentimes we feel without logic. We feel without reason. We scatter ourselves in colors and spaces and sounds and places and people, and film takes those pieces of us and tries to put us back together again as something greater than ourselves, something that exists in us and outside of us. That is what art house does. That is what Melancholia and Happy as Lazzaro do. They understand their isolation, they understand the unique niche of their experiences, and in true art house fashion, they put all their heart behind it anyway. And in doing so, they give us a sense of something greater, something happening, just out of our reach.